right. Still figuring out how to use and stream. I'm not a professional streamer, nor will I pretend to be. Hope this is recorded. Pardon me, thus. All right. Hello, everyone. Or no one. Hello to myself. Uh, Today, we're going to read through The Idea of Order at Key West by Wallace Stevens. And a little bit of context for Stevens' life and just for literature in general. This poem is going to be written in I believe in 1922. I could be wrong. It's written in 1934. Okay. So, The Idea of Order at Key West is written in 1934. And it's a really interesting poem. Historically, just putting Stevens in the context of other writers of the time, other modernist American writers. So that others include Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Marianne Moore, Yeats, W.B. Yeats. And this poem, whereas those other modernist writers tended to be more concerned with social issues of the day, social political issues, particularly how literature is going to, in some way, contribute and add to society. So there's this belief amongst modernist writers, or many, such as Eliot and Pound, that society has gone too far in the way of science, and that sort of after the Cartesian split, way back in the Renaissance, that Descartes is said to have cut the throat of poetry. And in doing so, what this means is Descartes removed poetry, truth, knowledge from sentimentality. And in order to be scientifically objective, you have to remove your subjectivity. And so, whereas it used to be blended, that the human sensory data, feelings were intertwined with actual knowledge. After Descartes, we get scientific approaches like the scientific method that we see today, that you start with a hypothesis and try to, in some way, create an objective scene through which to understand the world. However, in the context of World War One, in 1914 and 1918, all of a sudden and it was sort of leading into this with modernity, the Industrial Revolution, and so forth. There's a growing sense amongst modernist writers that the modern age is divorced from any type of sentimentality. It's lacking feeling. So uh, T.S. Eliot, for example, is in his poem Preludes, written 1910, 1911, is going to say things, use what he calls the objective correlative. So he's going to present a series of concrete objects or scenes. So things like broken blinds, chimney pots, and to elicit a type of emotion. So that poem ends, with women gathering fuel in vacant lots, um, and he calls them ancient women, and because in sort of this mock that look at the ancient knowledge of modernity is just going to be full of people who are sort of half dead, half alive, living in this scientific dystopia that's removed from all feeling and vitality in life. So whereas Pound and Eliot are going to be more concerned with this modernism and modernity itself, what does it mean to move towards cosmopolitanism? Well, Stevens belongs much more to a type of aestheticism. So if you think of maybe Oscar Wilde, a famous phrase, art for art's sake. Um, Importantly, art for art's sake is not removed from these social pressures or trying to add social value to just be contained within the small world of poems. In fact, these poets and artists of aestheticism are trying to very much get at just what it means to be human. They just don't want to be bounded and required to have to write about a political moment. Um, and so, an idea of order, at Key West, the poem we're going that's featured today, Stevens is going to address what it means to be human, and by that I mean just the negotiation and the fact that we all live and we all die, and through the experience of life, we encounter and share a wide array of emotions. And in the idea of order at Key West in particular, Stevens is going to question to what is it about our minds in the way we process and synthesize information that's going to derive or elicit aesthetic experience. So why, when we look at think of the idea of order, why is our mind ordering things to put them in a line to understand it? And furthermore, though the question's not fully answered, is there what is driving this? Is there a metaphysical presence that causes us to order the different shapes of our reality? Um, so, as we read through the poem, and, um, Stevens is going to be looking at, or the speaker rather than Stevens is going to be looking at a woman singing on the beach, and the speaker is going to contemplate as this woman singing how these different elements of the world fit together. Why? How is it that the crashing waves, the sound of the wind, um, are all in some way contributing to this woman's voice, even though how are these separate parts contributing to the whole of the experience, of the aesthetic experience? Um, and one more thing, briefly, I mentioned how writers are moving past scientific approaches and onto um, and trying to get away towards something that combines the sentimentality or feeling of the world to an otherwise pretty grim technological advancement that human beings are just only trying to propel. So how to propel technology? How are we getting to what it means to be human? And in this, Wallace Stevens is probably the most lyrical modernist in that his verse is sort of sing-songy. It's very beautiful. It places an emphasis on melos rather than logos. So that is on the musicality, the sonics of the word. How does it sound to the ear rather than the scientific logic of it? That doesn't mean that there's not logic, but it does mean that Stevens's language is going to entice you by its sound before it does by its sense. So here, just listen to the poem, and then I'll read it, and then we'll go through and try to unpack its different elements. Okay. The idea of order at Key West. She sang beyond the genius of the sea. The water never formed to mind or voice, like a body, holy body, fluttering its empty sleeves. And yet its mimic motion made constant cry, caused constantly a cry that was not ours, although we understood inhuman of the veritable ocean. The sea was not a mass, no more was she. The song and water were not medleyed sound, even if what she sang was what she heard, since what she sang was uttered word by word. It may be that in all her phrases stirred the grinding water and the gasping wind, but it was she and not the sea we heard, for she was the maker of the song she sang. The ever hooded, tragic gestured sea was merely a place by which she walked to sing. Whose spirit is this? We said, because we knew it was the spirit that we sought, and knew that we should ask this often as she sang. If it was only the dark voice of the sea that rose, or even colored by many waves, if it was only the outer voice of sky and cloud, of the sunken coral water walled, however clear, it would have been deep air, the heaving speech of air, a summer sound repeated in a summer without end in sound alone. But it was more than that, more even than her voice and ours among the meaningless plungings of the water and the wind, theatrical distances, bronze shadows heaped on high horizons, mountainous atmospheres of sky and sea. It was her voice that made the sky acutest at its vanishing. She measured to the hour its solitude. She was the single artificer of the world in which she sang. And when she sang, the sea, whatever self it had, became the self that was her song, for she was the maker. Then we, as we beheld her striding there alone, knew that there never was a world for her except the one she sang, and singing made. Ramon Fernandez, tell me if you know why, when the singing ended and we turned toward the town, tell why the lights in the fishing boats at anchor there, as the night descended, tilting in the air, mastered the night and portioned out the sea, fixing emblazoned zones and fiery poles, arranging, deepening, enchanting night. Oh, blessed rage for order, pale Ramon, the maker's rage to order words of the sea, words of the fragrant portals dimly starred, and of ourselves and of our origins, in ghostlier demarcations, keener sounds. So the focus here in the poem is going to be the poet's role. And as I mentioned, instead of the modernity of a T.S. Eliot or Pound that they were concerned with, Stevens believes that the role of the poet is much more to pierce into the relationship between reality and the imagination. And so, how the reality and the imagination for Stevens are going to be intertwined. He believes that naming is of things, calling this a bottle, is itself a human invention. And therefore, if at the very sight of words, the imagination is taking hold, then the world that we construct around ourselves is inherently imagined. And reality and the imagination are like this. So the poet's role for Stevens then becomes to how do we, through the use of the imagination and reality, peel back the onion, peel back the veil of surface reality and peer into the more precise revelations to what he calls these keener sounds of our reality. And again, Stevens is going to do this in the idea of order at Key West by thinking about how the human mind composes reality, how does the imagination work to play? And when he's going to ask whose spirit is this? Is it a metaphysical spirit that's allowing the imagination to tie these seemingly different parts of the woman singing, the skies, horizon, the sound of the waves, and making it all compose together? So in this poem, we're going to get, and let's just look stanza by stanza, moving somewhat. First of all, she is a maker, and a maker is the Greek word for poet. So she is the maker. She is this type of spiritual muse for Stephen. So what is it also about himself that wants to fuse these different elements of reality and render a poem? So in this first stanza, we get lots of personification. Um, and it's going to be moving. And so personification is using human characteristics to describe non-human events. So, such as the sea or the water. She's saying beyond the genius of the sea, the water never formed to mind or voice, like a body, holy body, notice like a body, fluttering its empty sleeves, again the human. And yet its mimic motion made constant cry, the sound of the sea, caused constantly a cry. That was not ours, it's not of us. Although we understood, it's inhuman of the veritable ocean. And here at the exact moment, in the word veritable, you know, used as the word veritable is defined as used as an intensifier, often to qualify a metaphor. So here he's qualifying the metaphor of the sea as human. So again, it's playing with this tension between what we perceive to be true, but is actually true. How reality is working, how is the imagination working? The sea was not a mask, no more was she. And then he's going to start thinking here about how each word is, how each element of nature is put together. Neither a mask, they are what they are. The song and water were in that medleyed sound. So this woman's song and the crashing water. Even if what she's saying was what she heard, since what she's saying was uttered word by word, so he's still giving precedence to her words. and saying that they're not medley, they're not mixed together, even if what she's saying was what she heard. Since what she was saying is word by word is not the sound of the ocean. It may be that in all her phrases stirred the grinding water and the gasping wind, but it was she and not the sea we heard. For she was the maker of the song she sang. So she's the focal point off of which everything is going to, according to the viewer's perception, is going to be taking shape around. The ever hooded, tragic gestured sea, again, the personification, a tragic gesture of a nihilism in the sea, tragic gestured sea, was merely a place by what she walked to sing. Whose spirit is this? We said. So he's contemplating what's making this happen. Because we knew it was the spirit that we sought and knew that we should ask this often, as she sang. And now we're going to get a series of different elements